So this is the third video in our Essentials of Business Security, and today we are talking phishing, fraud, and threat reduction with Alex. How do I pronounce your last name? Rosier?
Yeah, Rosier.
Rosier. I guess to kick things off, how long have you been with ProtonMail, and what sort of things do you do there?
Yeah, so I've been with ProtonMail now for about 4.5 years. The company is about 5 years old, a little more than 5 years old. So it was me and four other people when I joined, and I've been working on pretty much anything and everything you can imagine. Started off, being the direct person that would talk with customers and users when we were just getting started, and have kind of just kept that as one core principle of my position throughout the time. Now I'm working more on our B2B side, working with small businesses, moving more now towards medium and large businesses, but just making sure, talking with customers, making sure that we're building the product that meets their needs. So it's been as you can imagine, with any startup or new business, it's been a wild road and a wild journey the past 4.5 years. And so, yeah, it's been fun though.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about like what ProtonMail is and what it does for its customers.
So ProtonMail, it's a secure email provider. We started as about 5 years ago. We now serve right around 15 million users. We started with a B2C product, so a large portion of those are consumers, and they're just using ProtonMail just as they would any other email provider, Gmail, Yahoo, and the whole value proposition is making email secure and by default and easy to use. And so we obfuscate a lot of that. A lot of the security is built into the architecture of the product, and so the end user doesn't really see it. All of our emails are encrypted, and it's encrypted on the user's browser. And so, it requires using a ProtonMail client, email client. We offer mobile clients, we offer web clients, we offer a bridge that allows you to use Outlook, Thunderbird, third-party email clients as well. But when a user sends an email through ProtonMail, by default, that email is going to be encrypted. Now, obviously, if you're sending outside of ProtonMail's network, so anyone that's using ProtonMail, those emails are encrypted by default very seamlessly. Once you send to a Gmail address, takes an extra step where you set a password, and then that message is then, you've seen you're sent to a kind of a secure portal, and you enter a password as the recipient to view that message. But now that as there's value as our network grows now with 15 million users, we're seeing more and more in-network messages, which is the easiest way to ensure your message is end-to-end encrypted and secure.
Nice. So when we look at things like phishing and fraud and things like that, what do you think are the biggest security risks or threats on the email side? And particularly when we look at things like the corporate sector.
Phishing and fraud and spoofing and things of that nature are probably the biggest threat to email. We focus on encryption, and so that kind of solves the other big vulnerability, which is you're trusting a third-party email provider to hold your data. That could be industry secrets, just credit card, bank information, and then obviously your communication within your organization. So we handle that, and we secure that pretty well. That's one side of email security that you have to worry. There's kind of two sides. There's where the data is stored, and then there is obviously email is a communication channel, and that opens you up to any sort of attacks from be it phishing, be it spoofing, spam, things like that. So it's a huge issue. Email is still the predominant communication channel within organizations. Obviously, a chat, and we see Slack and all these other chat providers coming into the market, obviously taking away a little bit of that communication channel, but it's still by far the largest one we're seeing. And I think it's testament to most people understand email is still critical to organizations. And so phishing and spoofing, they're kind of the biggest risk you have. Once you ensure your data is secured and you trust your email provider, then it's the attack vector that I personally think, obviously I'm biased to, work with the secure email provider, but even beyond that, it goes, the problem with phishing and spoofing is it goes way beyond just email. This plays into every security, IT system you have within your organization, because by definition, phishing is typically trying to gain access to some sort of personal information that person has access to. And, I'm sure, as you guys are aware, at 1Password, password reuse is a huge security issue, across whatever, all businesses. And so as soon as specifically, let's just talk passwords. So let's say phishing, an employee that has access to multiple different systems within your organization gets phished for one particular system that you may not consider to be critical to your organization, but has made the mistake of reusing a password with that non-critical system into the critical system. And so then all of a sudden, you're vulnerable. Potentially all of your systems are now vulnerable to compromise due to that phishing attack. So it's a huge issue. It's one that at ProtonMail we're constantly fighting. It's the battle is never over with phishing. And yeah, so that's just password reuse. Obviously, phishing can get into all kinds of sensitive data, and so it's something we constantly prioritize within our organization.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, just the scope of this like single threat method, basically, because you could get anything from someone just simply asking you like almost a random question, and if you're an Apple Mail, for example, there's nothing that kind of protects you against someone misspelling an email address slightly and kind of going through that. Like at least some mail clients kind of flag that up and stuff. But yeah, there's so much that so many mail clients and so many things that don't give you any protection against just the simplest of phishing scams. Do you find that basically the one way to tackle phishing is education, right? Is teaching people how to spot these things.
That's basically it. And I mean, to your point, it's not as straightforward as it may sound. Even with education, it's still a tricky proposition. If it was as simple as, oh, you just have to spot these trends, then all email clients would just spot those trends for you. The problem is it's constantly shifting. So you have to constantly be re-educating yourself. It takes your own personal knowledge of who you're talking about. In this case, so we're talking about the inbox. So it takes, your personal knowledge of, okay, who do I see in my inbox? Who do I trust? Who should be in my inbox? Shouldn't? Those are the kinds of things that, for instance, we as the email provider don't necessarily have access to, as far as, okay, I know this person, I was just in a meeting with them, I was just on the phone with them, so I'm expecting an email from them, even though they're not in my contacts or things like that. They're a trusted provider, or, a trusted person. Where it comes into play, the big risk is, okay, now I receive an email from a system that looks legitimate, but I have no idea as the end user. And so, but the email provider can never pull that out and say, oh, this is a someone that looks like they're, a hacker. And, obviously we have machine learning in place that's constantly working to identify, the obvious ones and things of that nature, but there'll always be the edge cases that get through. And that's where education comes into play. Even within ProtonMail, we are constantly doing, I mentioned to you before the call, we're constantly doing education within our own, employees, and doing, sending out test phishing messages within our to our employees to see, okay, what gets through, where are we still vulnerable? And to your point, just a tiny little misspelling in the name on an email address that you receive a message from could, it looks legitimate at first glance, but all of a sudden it's from somebody else. They're pretending to be, we sent one out. I'll give you an example. As one of these education things we do internally, we sent one out pretending to be our CEO. We sent a message to everyone within the organization saying, here's a Dropbox link, click on or a link to Dropbox, click on the link and enter your Dropbox credentials. We, first off, we don't even use Dropbox internally, but it was close enough. It was a spoofed email address, so it looks kind of like it was coming from our CEO. And right there, we sent it again. Another variable to this test was we sent it during a social event that was happening during the a company-wide social event. So we knew that these people were going to, the employees were going to be distracted. And there are all these variables, things that you can get creative with when you're doing these educational, and then next step, doing the test to see how the education is going. But there still was a failure rate there, and so it led to, okay, we need to do additional training to our employees to let them know, we don't click on links from third-party providers that aren't authorized within the organization, and we don't download attachments without there being certain steps you take to verify those attachments. So, but it's something you have to continue doing because these threats keep changing. Policies within the organizations need to be updated and things of that nature to adjust for the different attack vectors that keep changing. But education is critical, and it's crazy how few organizations realize this is a threat. And this is one of the biggest threats, right? That's really facing their email inbox. Really all systems in general. So whenever I talk to organizations, obviously I talk to a lot of organizations that are coming looking to secure their email, moving over to ProtonMail, but I'll do a run through with them. Okay, you're going to move to ProtonMail. We'll make sure your emails are secure, but let's get into the nitty gritty as far as the policies you have in place, education you're doing within your organization, because it covers everyone from the admin, the person at the front desk, all the way to the CEOs and executives. It doesn't matter who in the organization it is. If they have an email address, they're vulnerable. So, and there are plenty of good resources I'll point them to as far as different education methods and training tips to stay on top of things. But yeah, it's critical.
What do you generally find the best way is to kind of put these education or processes in place?
I guess first step is you need somebody who has responsibility for security within your organization. And, that seems like an obvious thing to say, but particularly in small businesses, that's critical. They're restrained for resources. Oftentimes, like you said, they have a consultant coming in that's probably doing their IT for them, and no one within the organization really wants to think about this stuff. They also may think, oh, we don't really have anything to lose. We're not dealing with very critical stuff. But you'll be surprised, you don't think about it, and then once it's there at risk, and you've lost it, you're like, oh, that would have been important to protect against. So first thing is having somebody, an IT security leader, we call it, or whoever you want. Sometimes this is somebody in IT. If you have an IT department, obviously, that's easier to handle and make sure that somebody is defined there as the IT security leader. But sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's somebody who has to, take this on in addition to their everyday role that that they do within the organization. So first, establish who that IT leader, security leader is, and who has responsibility to stay on top of this stuff. In particular, education. And then the next step, though, once you have the security leader, is let's sit down and oftentimes it's kind of forming a committee or something along those lines of a few different people within the organization who have access to the different systems, and let's take a holistic view of what the organization has to lose. And so then once you have that, and you kind of define, okay, what is our different threat model, or what are we trying to protect against? What are our mission critical systems, and where is data that we have? Where are we vulnerable, and what are the different attack vectors? Then once you define, okay, these are different attack vectors. These are we have, let's say, a database over here. We have our bank account. We have security secrets. We have be it different communication channels where our employees are discussing, or if we're talking to clients and things of that nature and we're sending attachments, there's another. If we're using cloud systems for productivity, file storage, things like that, we need to protect against that. So you got to think about all of these. Obviously, it goes a little bit beyond phishing and education specific to email and communication, but you have to think about them all, and then you have to start. Then you can back into, okay, now let's come up with an education plan. At least we've defined here what our critical systems are, how you can gain access to them, what we're trying to protect against, because that's kind of, you have to start with a goal. And then you can work backwards. And, to your point, okay, yeah, we shouldn't be sending $100 gift cards out to just anybody. So, it's a little bit different. We're talking more, security of systems and things of that nature, and protecting our data, the organization's sensitive data. And then rolling out education, this is where you have to just, come up with a policy, put it in place. And this typically means, like I said, running simulations, doing trainings. We recommend at least having an annual, sit down with the whole company, where you run through, be it 30 minutes or whatever, where you run through and do basic in-person training. Obviously, companies are more and more remote, so you could do webinars as well, or webcasts, things of that nature. But it's important to take. A lot of people just say, "Oh, like I need education. Okay, where do I start? Like I need to start right away." Like without going, okay, how are we going to ensure we put the processes in place so that this is going to be a long-term solution, and somebody in the organization is responsible for ongoing. But then as far as rolling out the education, it's just about consistency. You can find different resources, like I mentioned earlier. There's plenty of stuff out there as far as different steps you can take, and what you need to be educating on. I don't know. Maybe that's what this webcast will end up being. This web series you guys are putting together, as far as the different, where people can look for those resources. But yeah, so be it the Krebs on security that you had last week, or whoever the case may be, there are different thought leaders out there in the system. At ProtonMail, we have a blog. We're constantly putting out different tips, and we're updating. We put out educational material on how to educate against phishing within the organization. But it's just a step-by-step process you have to go through, and then you have to stick to it. And that's the hardest part. That's why first, like, okay, you need somebody who's responsible as the security leader within the organization, because it's so easy to get hyped up. You see a news title saying, a so-and-so got hacked, or this ransomware is running wild. We saw a couple of years ago throughout all the hospital systems, that was pretty crazy, ransomware going everywhere. And so it's easy to follow those news cycles and get, excited about it, and then other priorities creep in. So really putting somebody as the, who's responsible for it is what we really push for. And then, defining what your threat model is, and then obviously getting down to the education stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point of, like, you don't have to be a business at the size of, someone who has a CISO, or like, an information security officer of any type.
Right.
And like, we have fire marshals in businesses, and yet fires happen far less often than like phishing and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it would be really interesting to kind of see a push towards kind of having someone in the business who perhaps it isn't their role, but it has kind of taken it on, and just, because of an interest.
Absolutely.
More and more we see kind of the media reacting to individual threats, rather than thinking like, actually someone needs to be on top of educating this all the time.
Yeah.
Do you see any kind of interesting like waves in phishing attacks, in terms of, like, one of the ones that we've seen recently is the whole, where they tell you that they have a password of yours, and of course they've taken this from a breach, and then they use that to like gain legitimacy.
Right.
And so it's almost like, we have this password of yours, and we're gonna expose XYZ, and like, using that as legitimacy. Do you see any kind of waves of other ideas of attacks?
Yeah, that's interesting. That obviously gets into the whole spear phishing type of um, you know attack versus in the past we saw more just general the stereotypical Nigerian prince kind of model where you get this message saying, I'm a Nigerian prince, I have, a bunch of money to give you or things like that, which obviously, maybe some people's grandparents, maybe my grandma has fallen for something along those lines, but, people have wised up to those. Um, your point about the spear phishing attacks, we see all kinds of stuff. There's not one that sticks out to me as far as a trend goes. Obviously, there's the site haveibeenpawned.com, which is kind of, I don't know if I have my information there. I constantly get alerted to when a security breach happens and get notified if my information was in that breach. And this is systems that I signed up for years ago that I've forgotten about. So that's a very interesting one because that information is out there. You don't even have to necessarily have the password, although those passwords, I just saw some not too long ago, a few weeks ago, there was some breach with a billion different unique password and email combinations that was out on the dark web. Just available. You didn't have to pay for it or anything. It just, hackers had aggregated all these databases together, and there you go. They had a billion different records of individuals' email and password combinations. So that particular hack, I think that's what people don't understand about this is the data's out there. You had mentioned your phone number, in a previous conversation between us, and how most people just assume, phone number, it's not really sensitive data, right? You kind of expect, you're giving it out to everybody. You kind of accept that, okay, your phone number is out there, people have access to it. But people think that people still hold different information that they have as being private and don't realize how widely accessible it is. And that's okay. Password hacks are kind of the extreme version of that because they've been acquired through nefarious means most of the time. And so technically those should be a private information, but we'll see all the time, phishing attacks where they're going through their social media profiles, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, and pulling within the past couple of days something that person has said or shared with a friend or something along those lines. And it's like, oh yeah, like I was just thinking about that. Oh, we must know each other, or we must, you must be a legitimate source, when they forgot, oh, that was a public forum that I shared that on, or so we'll see that, or on LinkedIn if they're doing job searches, and common one, they're doing a job search and then someone's contacting them as a hiring manager or something like that, asking them to send over some confidential information, and they're kind of vulnerable. They're actively in a search. They may be publishing different places. They're looking for a job and things like that. And when people are looking for jobs, they're vulnerable. And it might not matter to them right then. It may not be a vulnerability right then, but it's one of those situations where the phishing attack, they get the information and that attack doesn't start hurting them, in the password reuse situation. It could be they're reusing passwords for years and years. It doesn't hit them for another couple of years as to, oh, I leaked that information back then, and now all of a sudden my critical systems are vulnerable. So yeah, I don't know. We haven't really seen a trend per se right now. None come to mind. That the password one is interesting. Have I been pawned has kind of democratized that data to some degree. I think, anyways. I keep seeing them, grow and grow. It seems so. But that's a tricky one. You see somebody send you a password reset link. It has your password right there in the message, and you're like, yeah, that is my password. That must be legitimate. And then you click the link and enter your new password, and now the phisher has access to your new password too. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Do you think there's a particular like size of business that is at risk most from phishing, or do you just generally find like attacks are large and untargeted, like with businesses in mind? Like, is it just a broad kind of thing?
So our data is kind of biased at ProtonMail because we've started more towards the small business category. Now we have several larger businesses, very large businesses that use us, but it's definitely skewed the data we see. Industry data shows that it doesn't really matter the size of business. It used to be more targeted towards the larger businesses, thinking, oh, they have more to lose. The hackers can get more out of them. But more and more, the way that technology is, ubiquitous and that information is just out there, we're seeing more and more. I mean, the small businesses we work with are very much a target, just as the big, larger organizations. I just saw a study recently. I think the number was 58% of the targets are small businesses. So it's about 50-50 as far as the split goes, and makes sense. Those larger businesses are definitely vulnerable to these attacks, but the small businesses have just as much to lose, and they'll pay for it. Ransomware is a huge issue. We saw there was a huge onslaught of that over the past couple of years, and those small businesses, they have the money to pay the ransomware and things of that nature. So you'll see that we don't really see a difference between small and large businesses, but everyone is vulnerable.
Yeah, especially with ransomware. Like, people see the kind of the large ones that hit the news, but I think it's far more common than people actually think. Like, if someone took over my machine and wanted $1,000, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely.
you just pay $1,000, right? But like, if they can send a couple of thousand emails like that a day, and one comes back, that they're still earning enough money to make it, a viable, albeit horrible lifestyle for someone,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so do you think there's anybody in the business that is a particular and common target? Like, I've definitely found moving from a kind of a design role to a senior operations role. Like, I got all mostly none as a designer, but senior operations, I am getting one a week, I reckon. That's like, not convincing, like not one that someone's put a ton of effort into, but like, enough.
Yeah. The information is just out there. You can put the filter down and see, okay, these people are executives, or these people are, have the potential to have access or authorization to send different information or have access to different information. I mean, we see that anyone is vulnerable, to my point earlier, anyone from, the front desk all the way up to executives. But, and that's more of a, we push that ideal to encourage education throughout the organization. Obviously, when you get up into the executive levels, people are, you move a bit faster. You're handling potentially more information. Your scope is a little bit wider, and so yeah, you're more vulnerable to a degree. But we like to push. Look, everybody is vulnerable. We don't want to narrow it too much, and then people just say, "Oh, we'll just educate our executive team. We don't have to bother anyone else." Really, who knows where the attack can come in. If it's some nuanced little system off to the side that you had forgotten about, but really it ends up being critical, and only a designer had access to it. But then they get access to wherever keep your design documents, but then there's password reuse over to some other system. Again, it's too hard to say, and it's too risky to say only our top executives have access to these different systems and then forget about some. So we just say, look, you need to educate everyone within your organization.
That's pretty wise. Uh, so I think in this webinar, what we've tried to cover is things that are coming through email, and in the other webinars that we've done, we spoke to Troy Hunt, and he's kind of in charge of have I been pwned and all that information. And then we also spoke to Malwarebytes as well about the specific, like, on device checks that you can make for these kind of malware. So we've really tried to kind of make a broad step towards improving security in a business. I guess my last question, unless you have any additions to add, is basically what does your ideal stack look like in terms of security that you would recommend for a business?
Well, ideal stack. I'm far too biased to answer this question
I
with
think we
any
both
lean.
are.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell people, ProtonMail for email, I think is a good choice. Although, we've only entered we have about 15 million users, but we're pretty new to the business side of things. So we're about 2 years in, and so we're still very much building that offering. Um, Parts, our offering is pretty robust, but you'll find every once in a while we will have to turn people away and say, look, we just don't meet your needs right now, but we're building towards it, and let's stay in touch. um, Productivity suite in general is a tricky one. Gmail is kind of ubiquitous at this point in their G Suite. It's amazing how they've kind of grown their market share. 10 years ago, I'm sure we would have all been like, what? Gmail, G Suite is going to be a thing for the workplace. Everyone was Office 360 or Office, just Office at that point. And so, yeah, so obviously, Office and G Suite still offer some value to organizations, though Fastmail is another email provider. There are all kinds of different email providers out there that you can get into that are doing a pretty good job. Some are doing a terrible job. So, we're pretty good about being consultative in our approach. If a small business comes to ProtonMail and says, hey, we're worried about email security, we're happy to tell them, look, this is what you need to be concerned about. This is how ProtonMail approaches it. Might not be the right fit for you. So, here are some other options for you as well. Um, but then, so as far as the stack goes, I'm also biased around networking. We offer a VPN product for networking, Proton VPN. But they're even just using a VPN. HTTPS is kind of getting ubiquitous at this point, and so it's as far as networking goes, you're a bit more protected, but it's still important to have some sort of network protection within your organization, and then beyond that, lock down different systems behind firewalls and things of that nature. Password managers are critical. 1Password does a great job. You guys have been around for a while. um, I that's basically, we can get into more and more systems, but as I think about it, those are what I hear the most. 2FA is a huge one that, it's not really a system or a provider or anything, but just ensuring that all of your providers offer 2FA, all of your email system, or sorry, all of your IT systems offer 2FA. It's amazing how I talk to people and they're just like, yeah, but I can't even get my staff to remember their passwords. I'm not really going to have them deal with another little, even if it's just a one-time password through like Authy or a Google Authenticator on your mobile device or whatever. But that's critical. Even that step alone, I would say, probably cuts down your risk by, I don't know, 75% is I would guess, as far as phishing goes, and particularly around password and system vulnerabilities when it comes to password. That's basically it, though. When I talk to people, is look, just use 2FA on everything. Make sure you're choosing good providers that have at least some backbone on, when it comes to encryption, at least are talking about it to some degree. And then let's see. I don't know. What are some other? Do you have other ones that come to mind for you?
I mean, with us, one password kind of covers the 2FA route and the unique password route. But yeah, I would definitely say kind of unique passwords. HTTPS, you're right, does cover you against a lot of um, a lot of risks nowadays. But a good VPN on things like public Wi-Fi is really important. Um, yeah, a decent kind of when it comes to phishing, I think knowledge and stuff like that is as valuable as software really. But yeah, you're right. Like 2FA does help in phishing to a certain extent. I do find when you're handing over your passwords, that's a huge single factor that's gone. Reliant then on a second factor, and again backed up by things like mobile phones. It's you know that's the real thing of 2FA for me. The real issue is when they kind of when the provider offers 2FA, but they back it up by saying we'll deactivate it and send you a text, right? So you have to you have to apply these layers, I think, to get security, because there's always going to be kind of ways around, and the attacker is always going to have the ability to find out knowledge on you and use that kind of against you,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
absolutely. I mean, even just specifically with that 2FA, you have the nuance between SMS based 2FA, to your point, versus the one time password, app based 2FA generator. And we've seen compromises on the SMS based version, but for an end user, for a small business that's going about vetting their different providers to try to understand it, and here's okay 2FA, and then don't understand the nuance that okay, if they're using SMS based, hackers can actually now spoof that SMS to gain access to that one time code, and therefore get around that whole uh, extra layer of verification. So yeah, we recommend having the app based. We don't even offer the SMS based version within ProtonMail for that reason. But it's tough for an end for that IT security leader within your organization. You have to stay on top of it. You have to have a trusted source where you go to for information. I love that you guys are doing this webinar to keep surfacing relevant information. Because times just keep changing, and you have to keep vetting your provider, all of your systems based off of that. It's a tricky world out there.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and to kind of end with, is layers. Layers are the most important thing. Like we find in security, it's so hard to like not draw concrete lines between things and not say like, hey, never do this, never do this, never do that, because like you know we're human. We take the easiest route. We're gonna like make mistakes along some path. It's just having those layers in place and having those hurdles that if you trip at one, you've still got five to go, and stuff like that. So I think yeah, I think that's the most important thing to kind of leave people with.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
All right, well, yeah, thanks so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks for doing this, Matt.